Arthur Scargill, leader of the Yorkshire miners, leaves the conference hall at the end of his union's debate on wages. Yorkshire wanted the conference to demand a pay rise for miners of up to £20 a week. Yorkshire and Scargill were defeated.
Obviously, I'm bitterly disappointed that the resolution has not been carried by conference, and even more disappointed that it's been defeated by such a slender majority. We bent over backwards and we made overtures to the National Executive, which was supported by the National President and the General Secretary in an attempt to get a composite resolution. If there was any obstinacy in that conference, it was from those people who were not prepared to composite. When the National President, the General Secretary and the Yorkshire area are prepared to accept a composite and those other areas are not, the responsibility is theirs, not mine.
It was in the coal pits of Yorkshire that the demand for £20 a week was first heard. Yorkshire's the biggest and most powerful area in the National Union of Mine Workers. Yorkshire is now one of the most militant areas in Britain. The Yorkshire miners' leader is Arthur Scargill. He's clever, he's ambitious and he's powerful. He's a socialist and he's a Marxist. He delights in publicity, loves the limelight. He was born in this street in the village of Worsborough on the outskirts of Barnsley 36 years ago. Scargill's father and his father before him were miners. When he left school at 15, Scargill too went down the pits. On his first day, he began work on the screens, sifting the coal from the slag. The men he worked with then still work there now. It was worse then than now.
The air was so thick with dust that you couldn't see a yard in front of you. The noise was so intense that you couldn't speak to each other. You had to signal with sign language to tell each other the time. Give me an example. Well, for example, 2:45, this sort of thing, you know, 2:10. All these sort of signals had to be adopted by the lads if you were to communicate. We had to learn the art of picking out the dirt from the coal in this bloody atmosphere. That's all I can describe it as. When I saw it, I thought I've arrived in hell, and I nearly turned around and just ran away.
Scargill stayed at the pit for the next 20 years. He was soon marked as a militant. He led his first strike at 16. He joined the Young Communist League and was soon one of its leaders. At 18, he knew his Marx, had been to Russia, and had sat at dinner with Khrushchev. At 20, in a union run by old men, he became a branch official. Then, with its training behind him, he left the Communist Party and rose to spectacular prominence through the ranks of the union. He was frequently in trouble, not only with the bosses, but with the men. For some, he was too sharp, too clever by half. But as a union man, he was single-minded and tough. By the end of the 60s, Scargill had become the outstanding young man of the Yorkshire pits.
I was very critical not only of the older leadership, but of the restraining effect that it was having upon not only this pit, but of the whole of the industry. It was during this period, you will remember, that the industry lost 400,000 men and over 300 pits. And this was at a time when we were being praised to the skies by the Conservative and Labour governments for our responsibility and for our statesman-like attitude in the trade union world. I had another word for it. I called it collaboration. Collaboration in bringing about our own downfall as an industry.
Can you describe what the relationship, the division is, how different the older miners were from the younger miners? Why, for instance, the older miners were much more conservative than people of your age? What was it?
Oh, I think this is a historical reason. You've got to understand that the miners who were in the age bracket 50 to 60 or 65 were the people who were in the 1926 and the 1930 era, the Depression era. They had suffered intolerably. And there was a fear, a very genuine fear at the back of their minds that if they took any kind of action, it could be disastrous not just for them as an individual, but for the whole of the mining community. It was the younger men who were saying, well, to hell with an industry that can't pay high wages, to hell with an industry that's losing 400,000 jobs and 300 pits. If we're going to have that situation, then we're going to have a decent living wage for it. And that's when you started to get the change. And now I would say the older men are probably just as militant as the younger ones.
Just over a year later, Scargill was elected president of the Yorkshire area of the Union, the youngest president ever by the greatest majority ever. The Barnsley headquarters can be his for 30 years, for he's president for life. The seat of his power is the council chamber, where he presides over the delegates from each of Yorkshire's 70 pits, a chamber steeped in the symbols of the miners' struggle. Scargill's path to power was a struggle too.
There was, I'm right, during the period of your coming to power, the last 10 years or so, a clear and hard battle between you on the left and your opponents in the Union on the right. Is it?
That's a fair comment, yes.
How did that express itself?
Oh, in many ways. It expressed itself, I think, mainly each year on the question of the pay claim. The right wing inevitably argued that the pay claim should never state what amount of money we wanted, and that left it in the hands of the negotiators, those who knew best what we needed. And the net result, of course, was that we were getting pennies instead of pounds.
You use the words struggle and victory quite a lot. When you use them, you must have the idea of conflict. Can you express simply what that conflict is for you? We
have two goals. One, the short term, which is the establishing and maintaining and improving of wages and conditions, or whatever they may be, day by day, week by week, year by year. And the long-term political struggle, which means the ending of the present system of society and the replacing of that society by a socialist system of society. That, of course, is written into our rules and constitution, and therefore I'm duty-bound to carry it through. I'd like to say thank you to the committee for the very kind invitation.
As president of the Yorkshire Union, Scargill can voice his message almost unchallenged. On the eve of the NUM conference, he selects a social evening laid on for retired miners to thump home his hostility to the social contract. For this occasion, it's perhaps a trifle dramatic.
Britain is in a dilemma. A crisis is looming, and each and every one of us have got our part to play, or so the pundits would have you believe. Well, I want to try and explain and to expose the myth both of a social compact, which means a wage freeze, and the inflationary situation that we find ourselves in at the present time. As far as I'm concerned as the president of this union, I want to make it crystally clear and say publicly tonight, there can be no contract with a capitalist society that forces down the standard of life of every man, woman and child in the working class movement.
If the old miners were unmoved, in the pits, Scargill's words fall on eager ears. It was the men of Barrow Colliery who first moved the £20 wage claim. The claim was supported by every pit in Yorkshire. Scargill, mindful of the remote leaders of his youth, takes care to go among his men.
In the safety staff?
Yeah, safety staff. Start good at take, you know.
Best thing you could do, get a career.
He still has enemies, but the mass of the miners will hear no word against him, for it was he who led them into action in 72 and 74. He who helped bring them their victory then. He, they hope, who will bring it again. This year, the Yorkshire miners are as militant as ever.
Do you think there's general support for it?
Yeah. This thing that's been talked about so much, this £20 increase, this is as a direct result of the bad wage negotiations that have taken place in the past, that we've had to come from so far behind in an attempt to catch up that you're forced to have these kind of increases advocated. It's just a case of this. If they want coal in this country and they want an efficient mining industry, they've got to create men to work in these conditions. You've got to face it. We don't go mourning and groaning because we've got to work in dusty conditions, dangerous conditions. All we're saying is give us a living wage and we'll work down pits. It's just as simple as that. If money's there, come on, or come and join us. If it's with thousands of men short in my industry, come on, we'll get you a job. So I can't see how they can say to us we're being greedy. We're not greedy at all.
What does the social contract mean to you? How does that...
Well, I think social contract is another form of, well, wage freeze. I don't think it can work in a society today. Not when there's firm, well, capitalists making the profits what they are.
But every day when we open newspapers, ICI, Shell, massive profits. How do they guarantee, warrant this? Everybody looks, and record profits, every day, record profits. As soon as the working man wants to rise, sorry lads, social contract, stick down.
Can we order? Well, welcome to the delegation meeting here this morning. We have quite a long agenda, but in the view of the officials, we should first of all start with the main problem of conference, which is the wages debate.
The Yorkshire delegates meet in private to discuss their conference tactics. The Yorkshire miners seek new wage levels of up to £65 a week, a rise of about 40%. They seek the money by November the 1st, and they want industrial action if they don't get it.
Those who are going to try and compensate it, I suppose.
At least 3 meetings.
The right wing of the union, led by Nottingham, wants those figures removed. At the weekend, on the eve of the conference, the two sides are evenly divided. The question for Yorkshire is should they compromise for the sake of unity in the union.
I think the most important thing is we don't compromise the resolution on wages from Yorkshire. And I think personally, Mr. Chairman, that there is danger, and grave danger, in trying to compensate with the difficulties that exist. And our responsibility is to take the Yorkshire resolution that come from a branch in Yorkshire, was democratically discussed in Barnsley, and became one of the 3 resolutions for this conference. We may not win it, but at least we will have tried.
I don't accept what Tom says, that we've got to take the resolution through whether it succeeds or not, to prove to our people that we're carrying out the policy. We have to accept responsibility in view of the situation that we find ourselves. And I'm satisfied in my own mind that we shall not get the areas to support us. The resolution will be defeated, so from there on, we've got to act then in the best interests of those we represent from the Yorkshire area.
Can I just make one point to the delegates here? We think that this resolution, if it stands on its own, has a very good chance of succeeding. We think it's a very good chance of succeeding, but it will only be by a very slender majority. And as Jack says, it would be much better, of course, if we could get a degree of unity in the conference.
If it's defeated, then when we get back to the coalfields and we say to the men at the pit, Ed, well, lads, it's going to be a substantial increase, or alternatively, a reasonable increase, they're going to say, now what's that? What's gone wrong with our resolution, you know? Whereas we understand, if you're talking about £60, if you're talking about £40, we understand that, but what's reasonable? And same as what I started, Mr. Chairman, what's reasonable to some is unreasonable to others. But our resolution, I don't think it should be compensated. We ought to go full hog. And in your final remarks previously, you said, well, look, I think it's got a good chance of getting through, even if it's a slim majority. If we've got the majority, it's got through, and it's as simple as that to me, Mr.
Secretary?
While Yorkshire discussed the possibility of compromise at one end of the hotel corridor, 15 yards away at the other end sit the delegates to the conference from Nottingham discussing exactly the same thing.
Well, gentlemen, we come now to the most controversial resolution on the agenda. That's the one standing in the name of the Yorkshire area.
If Yorkshire is militant, then Nottingham is moderate. If Yorkshire's Arthur Scargill is on the left, then Nottingham's Len Clark is on the right. The pits of Nottingham are modern and productive. Its miners are slow to anger. They're in total opposition to Yorkshire's resolution. Their amendment to it would delete Scargill's 65, 50 and £45 a week, the figures which challenge the social contract.
suggest, Mr. Chairman, that if they're not prepared to do that, we can't support them in any way, shape or form whatsoever.
We are mandated from the area, from the men at the pits themselves, to oppose the Yorkshire one and support our own. It's essential that we oppose the Yorkshire one and we support the one we're mandated to do.
Can I take it then that we all agreed that the amendment stands as it is and conference should vote in either accepting the Yorkshire resolution or the amendment? Is that agreed? Agreed. Raise your hand. Is that unanimous? Thank you very much.
Let me say this. Don't anybody get the opinion that we think our men are not worth £65 and the other figures mentioned here. But it's the time. And also we have a resolution which was practically unanimously accepted in Nottingham, that we didn't want this confrontation every year over figures. We were prepared to go for something much farther, much wider, and we consider much better. So in a way, these two resolutions can't go together. That's apart from the amendment.
What is the objection to the figures? Why does it cause confrontation in your view?
Well, it installs in the men's minds that anything less than that is not acceptable. You condition men's minds to a figure of £65. You condition men's minds to £50, 45. I'm not saying with Mr. Martin that we're not entitled to that. But anything which appears to be less than that is not what we say we've not achieved the object of the resolution. Much better leave it free to get the best we possibly can within the atmosphere in which we're negotiating, and then let the men decide whether they want to accept or reject it.
As far as I'm concerned, we are committed to this social compact, and we should, as mine workers, should honour that. And the mine workers, having their two representatives on the General Council, have already agreed with this new policy, and as far as we're concerned, this should be the policy of
The social contract is seen to be fair and reasonable, doing its job of work in the best interest of this nation, to curb these inflationary circumstances we find ourselves in, and providing it's taking care for the low-paid income groups, and providing it's at least maintaining our standard of living, and as a result giving us the opportunity with the productivity bonuses to increase those standards, and taking into consideration that we're part of the TUC Congress, and we've got a government, and one's got to face up to the facts that they have done quite a responsible job.
We're committed to the Labour Party, we're committed to the TUC. And we think it's right of us that we should honour the agreements that have been made by the TUC, and we will try to honour any agreements that are made by the Labour Party.
By Sunday night, it was plain that left and right were still far apart. Joe Gormley, the union's president, anxious to avoid a public split in the union, urged both sides to reach a compromise that would satisfy both militant and moderate. By Monday evening, a compromise resolution had been composed, with the backing of both Gormley and Scargill, who had softened and altered the Yorkshire resolution.
If the composite motion is passed tomorrow, and I hope that it will be, that can only be interpreted as being in direct conflict with the social compact, if the social compact indeed does mean a wage freeze. And I can have no truck with a social compact that restricts my right or my union's right to free collectively bargain with the National Coal Board, or for that matter any other employer.
Now, have you given way at all in an attempt to produce a composite that can go through conference to show that the NUM is united?
Well, we've given way to this extent that we've said that the date of November the 1st can be removed, because that's not the main kernel of our resolution. As far as we're concerned, it is the £65, the £50 and the £45. And while we retain that, the Yorkshire resolution, as far as we're concerned, is intact. At the moment, in the new composite resolution, that is intact.
Very simply, do you think that the new resolution, the compromise, in order to get a composite, which is now underway, will go through tomorrow? Very briefly.
Very briefly, I think it will.
Well, I concede that Yorkshire's come a long way, but they're still left in the figures, which has been our bone of contention all the way through.
Now, your objection to the figures when we spoke last was partly that they ran a horse and cart through the notion of the social compact, the contract. Do you still hold that view?
I think so, yes. The public will see this as a request for a 40% increase, which is not in keeping with the government and the TUC contract.
On the next morning, the Tuesday of the debate, the eyes of the government, the TUC, industry and the city were on the conference hall. For here, the social contract was to be on trial. The compromise between militant and moderate had collapsed. Now Yorkshire's resolution for the £20 a week increase will be voted either in or out on the floor of the conference.
All about today's Mickey Day.
A Yorkshire victory would tear the social contract to tatters. A defeat would leave the contract intact. The debate, forbidden to the cameras, lasted an hour and a half. The result was hailed as a victory for the moderates, for the TUC and its contract with the Labour government. But it was a very narrow victory. Yorkshire was defeated by a mere 4 votes, 138 to 134. By the same margin, a resolution from the moderates calling simply for substantial increases was carried by the conference, so the union was split exactly in half. Joe Gormley had failed to persuade the two sides to compromise, but afterwards he seemed unconcerned by the split in the union. The social compact, after all, was intact. Just.
Has the TUC compact with the government been preserved and enhanced by the decision today?
I would think so. I would think so. I think the feeling of the delegates was, in general, I would say in general, the feeling of the delegates in general was in support of what the TUC is trying to do. Because after all, we all live in this society. This is it.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thanks a lot.
It's a step backward to the times before 1969, when we used to submit resolutions on wages which said we want a substantial increase. And the substantial increase only brought us literally shillings instead of pounds. And whenever you have a wages resolution which does not give specific instructions to the members of the National Executive Committee, it means simply that the members of the NEC can determine in their own minds what they think the membership should accept and not the other way around. So although people may read into it that it's a defeat for the militancy of the Yorkshire coalfield and the other coalfields who supported the resolution and a success for the social compact, I will wait and see the outcome of the negotiations and the desire on the part of the NEC.
Perhaps the miners of Yorkshire have been defeated. Perhaps the moderates have won the day. But these men know their strength. And if they were downcast yesterday, their spirits might have risen today. For at the conference a few hours ago, the Miners' Union voted to reject any form of incomes policy. That vote, a victory this time for the militants over the moderates, reveals that the social contract may be signed, even sealed. It's by no means yet delivered.
Right, Alan.